What is going on, guys? We're back at it again with another episode of True Capacity Talks. And today we have Mitchel May, Human Movement Guy. I'm sure that some of y'all are familiar with Knees Over Toes Guy, with the increase and desire for people to do all kinds of stuff that we weren't doing before. I am very happy to have you here today on the podcast, and I want to dive into a ton of things. I want to start off with just, hey, how you doing, man?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you being here. So, as we said prior to us hopping on here, I wasn't able to go deep dive on the origination of you doing what you're doing now. I do know that you had an 8 mm L5S1 herniation. Can you walk us through, first of all, how did that happen? What is that? And then how do you get on the path that you're on right now?
Yeah, so sure. So discrimination is just where you have vertebra in your back and your spine, and there's just that can, in an ideal world, they stay where they're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then but sometimes and a lot of people think it's like one movement. It's like, oh, I did a deadlift and then I herniated a disc. It's and what I've discovered is most likely you have a lot of movements throughout your day that you poor movement, movement where you're sitting in one end range and then it's just too much. And then eventually it's that deadlift that's kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. And then you herniate, and that's where there's stuff inside the disc. People refer to it as like a jelly, but it's a lot thicker and tough, resilient than that.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually that can push out of the disc. And then sometimes people have pain with that, sometimes people don't. But then if it pushes so far out where it compresses a nerve, so you have nerves that go through there, then you're probably going to be in quite a bit of pain. And that's what happened to me. I had nerve pain. So 8 mm is just the size of the disc herniation. L5S1 is the lower part of the lumbar spine. And then I had that herniated there, and it was pushing out, causing severe nerve pain down my leg. And I would say that the nerve pain is the worst pain. Like back pain is one thing. A lot of people, I have back pain. It's like, yeah, back pain sucks. But nerve pain is like debilitating. So that was the initial injury. I actually, and again, much like most people, I was deadlifting when that last little piece went. But I didn't really understand certain movements, certain things that I was doing in my everyday, and then also certain things I was doing in the gym that was contributing to that. So that was the initial injury. It was during CrossFit. I love CrossFit. I still do CrossFit. It wasn't CrossFit's fault. My fault for not understanding how to move properly.
Okay. Heck yeah. So you got to a place where you had, and at the time, probably debilitating injury, like stop you from doing all kinds of exercise.
Everything. Yeah, I would say 3 months of my life I was in, like, no matter what, I couldn't get into a position where I wasn't in pain.
Okay. Sitting, standing,
Didn't matter.
doing
Sitting
anything.
was the worst though. So it didn't, the first 3 months, it didn't matter what I did, it hurt. So laying down, standing, sitting, it still hurt, but it hurt a lot more when I was sitting. So I avoided sitting for actually like about a year of my life. I had trouble. I'm sitting now, so I'm back. But for about a year of my life, I couldn't sit without being in a ton of pain.
Damn. So if you couldn't sit, how were you? How are you sleeping? How are you eating? Were you just eating
Yeah.
standing up? Like,
So I'd eat dinner. I actually have a post on it somewhere, but yeah, I'd eat dinner standing. Obviously there's some non-negotiables. I still had to work, so I'd have to drive, but like on a 10-minute drive, I'd get out every 5 minutes. Because I couldn't take that pain. My like lunches, same thing. I'd either stand or lay down. Sitting was the worst. I still had pain, but it was like manageable. But sitting was like not manageable. That was like I said, that nerve pain. And if anybody's had nerve pain, they're gonna be like, it's just, you can't, like, I don't know. It sucks. It's the absolute worst.
can you describe nerve pain to me, like as compared to maybe like a shoulder tweak doing a snatch, or intra-abdominal, tightness? Can you describe what nerve pain is compared?
It's like well, okay, so there's different stages of nerve pain that you can have. You can have like numbness, which is like if you fell asleep on your arm, and you can't feel your arm, and it's like annoying and it's
The
numb. And
tingles, like where
yeah,
you're
I'm
like,
going
whoa, you
through
got to
that.
shake this out.
Yeah. And then so having that indefinitely is super frustrating. But then it can go, and I think this next phase is even worse than the numbness, is like it can go like lightning bolts. So it's like I can't even really explain it. It's just like a constant burning that goes down your leg, and it's just nonstop. And especially when you're first trying to navigate a disc herniation and you don't know what's right and wrong, and it hurts no matter what you do. it's really hard to navigate that and be like, oh, this is right and this is wrong because everything hurts.
Okay. And when you say lightning bolt, are we talking about it's pulsing or it feels like you have electricity running through a wire?
I think it feels like electricity through running through a wire. And a lot of times everyone has a little bit different sensations. And all of these are kind of like the same thing, like nerve symptoms. These would all be considered nerve symptoms. And it's to the degree that you're having the nerve symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Because some people just have the numbness. Some people have the pulsing. Some people have, even like when I was getting better, and this, we can get into this later, but it's like the road to recovery is not like nerve pain, no nerve pain. It's like nerve pain, less nerve pain only when I do this one thing, and then eventually no nerve pain.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds contrary to how people would think it would be. Like, hey, we've got nerve pain and it's like ones and zeros, off on switch.
Yeah.
It's either all here or it's gone. Not like
Right.
it regresses a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the whole year after you injured it, you had nerve pain, or even longer than that?
Longer than that. So I had so I got hurt, and then I had excruciating nerve pain for a long time. 2 years was the pain to no pain was how long it took me to get completely out of pain. And a lot of people see the stuff that I do now and they're like, oh, I need to do that stuff. And it's like, I herniated in 2019. So I spent 2 years living in neutral. So actually I found a guy on, I don't know if you're familiar with, his name's the shirtless dude. His name is Andrew Dettelbeck. He's on social. He's the first person that I kind of found that was talking about, or it was talking at all about discriminations. And then he was talking about how movement matters and you can kind of do these things. So then I kind of got onto that, like, okay, maybe I can fix this through movement. Because at the time when I went to the doctor, it was like surgery, that's that if it doesn't get better, surgery. That's what he told me. And then I was like, well, how does this happen? And he was like, could be genetic. And then I was like, that doesn't help me. So that's the piece of the medical side that I don't really like. It's not their fault, their job is one thing, it's like, hey, we know how to operate. We're very good at operating. But when it comes to movement, they don't know as much. So then I went down that whole movement thing, figured out, and I talk a lot about neutral pelvis, so you can give your back a chance to heal. And then moving on from there and then slowly building up range into, obviously right now I do big ranges of motion, but it wasn't always that way.
Yeah. Your Jefferson curls are pretty solid range of motion.
Yeah.
And it's super funny how I even got reintroduced, because I think I've been following you for a little bit. I feel like you collaborated with somebody and I came across you, but when we got on Threads, when it popped the other day, right, and you posted, I saw a video that then got thrown back up into my face of the comment section just trying to rip you a new one. It was a very funny video to me, because everything, you throw in the text of what people have said when you're doing these kind of movements. I guess, before we kind of go into a little bit of background of how you even got, after finding him, you got to a place where you started developing a protocol. That post specifically, is that the kind of reaction that you get from a lot of people and a lot of the content that you share?
Yeah. And honestly, I'm very fortunate. I deal with negative comments very harshly. So I try really, really hard not to, because you're gonna have negative comments no matter what. And the bigger you get, the more like negative comments you're gonna have. And I would say there's been a shift since Knees Over Toes Guy, even in the last year, where if you do a Jefferson curl now, you rarely do get negative I rarely get negative comments. Back like a year ago, it was going to be primarily negative comments. Like, you're going to hurt. And it's funny because people always tell me you're going to herniate a disc. And it's like, you have no idea how much I know about herniated discs. So, when I get it, I always try to use it as a teaching moment for anybody else that is actually reading the comments. Obviously, if they come at the conversation with like respect, it's a lot easier, because it's like, I'll have a conversation about it. There's a good argument against loaded flexion. There's a lot of studies out there that say you shouldn't be doing loaded flexion. There's a lot of studies out there that say you should. So I think there's a good argument to be made. Most people don't make that argument. Most people just come at it like, you're going to break your back. And then I'm like, why do you think that? And then they have nothing else to say.
Yeah. Or it's a personal attack. Like, you're stupid. You don't know what you're doing.
See, I love those. Those are, if it's like an attack on me, great. If the ones that I have a hard time dealing with are the ones that are like, you're going to hurt somebody. That's when it's like, I'm like, because I really try hard in my captions to say like, hey, this took me a long time. Don't try this. This isn't, whatever. Those ones I have a hard time dealing with. I think about it more than I should.
Yeah, well, I mean, how could you not if you're ethical, right? Because as an educator in and of yourself, like you're trying to take your experience with it and share with people so that they don't have to go through what you went through. But sometimes you're going to do things that if taken out of context, like Jefferson curls taken out of context, squat snatchers taken out of context, knees over toes split squats taken out of context. Like there's a
Yeah,
time and place, and there's an
exactly.
application that a lot of people that user 7'5", 6'2" with no picture commenting, you're stupid, and this is gonna hurt somebody. Like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
makes sense. It
Yeah.
really
It's
makes
hard.
sense.
It is hard because we also come from a world where everybody thinks fitness is middle range. So there you have flexion and extension on both sides, and everyone thinks, well, this is the range, but it's like the human body, well, one is capable a lot more, and two, you don't live in that range. You spend a lot of time outside extension and inflection in your day to day. So if you just think of it as like, well, then I'm less prepared in those positions,
Mm-hmm.
because I've never been in them. So if I can put myself in these positions training on purpose, and it's a methodical, there's a whole thought process behind it, then I'm more prepared in life when I get into these positions. But if you're like, hey, I need to move like perfect all the time, and there's a time and place for that. This is like where I have to be really careful how I say it. Because if you are dealing with a discrimination, I do think you almost have to move like a robot so things
Mm-hmm.
can heal. And then outside of that, you can start exploring into deep ranges because you have to. You're going to get into those positions eventually in your life.
Yeah, I think that that's an important distinction. I think people also don't realize that their knees travel over their toes when they go downstairs, anyways. Right?
Yeah.
I think that most people don't realize that when they get up from a chair, their knees go over their toes there too, because they rock their weight to their toes to get up. Sometimes,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, and
I
that
mean,
well, and that the downside, and this is a perfect example of a study being misinterpreted because that all stemmed from a study in 1970 from Duke saying, "Hey, you put more pressure on your knees when they go over your toes." So America interpreted that as like, "Don't do that," and then we've had a knee epidemic. So it's like it's just a misinterpretation because then they did a new study. I think it was 2017. I don't remember the study, but they did a new study where they found out that there's 1,000% more pressure in your hips when you don't push your knees over your toes. So coming from a back injury, especially a low back injury, if you don't push your knees, and I have a post about this too, but if you don't have your knees or if you don't let your knees go over your toes, your pelvis is probably going to roll under when you're squatting. And there's a lot of studies saying that that's not inherently dangerous. But I can tell you, coming from a disc herniation, if you have a disc herniation, if you're in pain, that's going to light you on fire. So you really need to figure out what your pelvis is doing. And if you're not letting your knees go over your toes, it's going to be really hard to squat to depth without sacrificing that position.
without having a butt wink and other accompanying things that come
Exactly.
with that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's roll back to your recovery. So you get injured, right? You go see an MD. Do you see your GP? Do you see an ortho? Who did you see for it
Yeah,
initially?
so I saw I actually had a friend that's an orthopedic surgeon, so I went to see him first, and then I got on like an oral steroid, which did nothing. And in the height of it, when it was really, really bad, nothing could touch the pain. Like no matter like painkillers, like
Mhm.
nothing could touch that pain. I couldn't do anything. And then it was like, then I went to see a specialist that was like, we went over my MRI with
Mhm.
me and said like, hey, told him what I was doing. And he was like, well, and at the time, all I was doing was press ups. I was doing the McKenzie method of press ups because a lot of people think that's the answer. And so that's all I was doing. And it was giving me some relief, but not, I mean, I was still in pain. And then he goes, well, if that's working, keep doing that. And if it stops working, then you are a candidate for surgery. And I think typically the candidates for surgery are when you have nerve pain. That's when they say, because there is a time when surgery is necessary. Like if you lose bowel function or limb function, like it's pretty important that you go see somebody because that's actually like that can be really serious. They can all really be serious, and it's all a personal decision what you
Mhm.
do. My goal was to avoid surgery because the data on surgery is absolutely garbage. 50% of all back surgeries lead to a second back surgery, and I wasn't willing to get my spine operated on a flip of a coin. So then I started to go down that kind of like, what can I do? Like, how can I fix this? And then the other option was like an epidural. They're like, well,
Mhm.
we can numb the area so you won't feel anything, which again doesn't make sense to me because it's like my
Mhm.
body's trying to tell me something, and your idea is just to either cut it out so it
Mhm.
doesn't bother me anymore, or mask the symptoms. And then when it comes to movement, I kind of need those symptoms to figure out what's wrong and right. And then, like I said, in the early days, the first 3 months, it didn't matter.
Mhm.
Everything right was still felt wrong. That's why it's important to find somebody that can help you, so you just kind of blindly follow what they're saying. And that's what the shirtless dude was to me, is like, I was like, okay, like you're where I want to be. Like, how do I need to move? And then I kind of expanded on everything I learned from him, and then kind of have my own system now.
Okay. So before we get to your system, and because I'm really am curious, I mean, I was looking at your programs, right? The athletic longevity, and then also like rediscovering basic human movement. I'm very curious about there, but on your recovery specifically, before you got to developing your own methodology that you employ with clients, what were the general recommendations from the shirtless guy that then got you more and more relief past the McKenzie method? Because it's hilarious that you say the McKenzie method. I have not heard anyone say that on a podcast in a very long time, because I think people have gotten away from Poliquin, away from McKenzie, away from a bunch of other people that I think we can learn something from, that maybe aren't God, but we can learn something from them. But we've kind of put them to the back with the old textbooks, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's important to say, because I think all of these people, there's merit to everything that they say. And that's like, none of these ideas are mine, right? Like, I've combined all of these different ideas, and then I've figured out what I feel works the best for me and my clients. It's really important to me that, like, that's the beauty of technology now, is that we can all collectively share ideas. And I try to give as much credit as I can. Like, none of these ideas I'm like, oh, I'm the pioneer. Like, even Knees Over Toes guy, like a lot of his stuff is like he popularized the ATG split squat. It's not his movement, but he popularized it, and he probably has taken it further than anybody else has taken it. And he gives credit to everybody that he's kind of learned from. And that's really important to me. Like, McKenzie, McGill gets a lot of crap, because it's not functional. And I think there's a time and place. I think that some of the studies, right, like dead pig spines, all that stuff, there's a time and place where a lot of that makes sense. Like for recovering, I agree with a lot of what he says. I think but then once I get to a certain point, I have a little bit different thoughts where I think you need to build in the flexion extension. But as for the shirtless dude, he was the first person that I heard talk about like your rib and pelvic position. And I would say that that's the biggest thing that I took from him, that matters, is like your alignment of how, like, of your spine in all your movements is all of those movements are adding up to something. And if your movement patterns are good, and then you start exploring flexion extension, you can really build a robust system. But if your movement patterns are bad, you can be contributing to your pain every single movement during the day.
Yeah. Okay. So you started there to trying to get to the root of how to get some relief, right? He gave you a method that you could follow. We're like, hey, if we're intentionally stacked this way, right, we can avoid adding to the pain or inflaming more.
Exactly. And again, it's such a weird time with social media, because I'm seeing a lot of stuff that says like posture doesn't matter. And there's all these studies that say posture doesn't matter. I saw somebody referenced a study where they followed people for 5 years, and they had people in good posture and people in bad posture. And after 5 years, the people in good posture had more back pain than the people in bad posture. And it's like, that's a garbage study. Because like, what are the parameters? Like, would you follow them all with 24 hours? Like, how'd they eat? How'd they exercise? What was their lifestyle? What was their past injuries? Like, there's like, it's kind of frustrating. Studies are frustrating because everybody wants to study. Like, in order for you to say anything, they're like, well, where do you see that? What study? And it's like, studies are great. Like, there's a lot, like, meta studies are awesome, but I don't think you can like live by that, because there's so many parameters that cannot fit what you're trying to say. So like, again, tell me what is good posture, and you're going to have people be in that. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, because everything doesn't have to be backed up by a PubMed citation, right?
Right.
I was having a conversation with a registered dietitian, and I'm sure you're familiar with the difference between a nutritionist and a registered dietitian, right? One's clinical, one's not. And she was telling me that there is no empirical evidence to suggest that taking a multivitamin or eating greens powder in any way improves psychological turnover for people taking then more care of themselves nutritionally. And I was like, I don't give a, like, for lack of a better term, I don't give a shit if there's no empirical evidence that says that that's related. I can tell you from coaching that if no one's ever had any kind of micronutrients from their food, and they start taking a multivitamin, and we pair that with other habit stacking, that you will start to eat more food that's better for you. I don't need a PubMed to tell me that that's the truth. I've seen it in front of me. It's probably the same thing with what you're saying. You're like, hold on.
100%. And everything has to come from anecdotal first. Like everything starts there. So one, in order for there to be a study, there has to be a reason for the study. So somebody has to be saying something where they're like, oh, we should find out if that makes sense. But the reason somebody's saying that is because they're having actual life, like, oh, this is happening in my life, or this is happening with my clients. And then the other side of that is money. Money is involved in everything. So if there's no way to profit from a study, then it's like, well, we're not going to do that one. Like we need it funded, and we need to be able to make money. So it's like, I don't know. It's like a revolving door. It's like you're not going to have studies without, action first. So like you can have these ideas. Obviously it's like good to like, you shouldn't be going completely against the grain on studies, but I don't think when you're coming up with something that like, you're like, this has worked for a lot of people. Like I'm seeing something to have it shut down right away because it's not backed by a study is really like defeating the whole point of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting thing to look at. And I think it's something that's often overlooked, that everyone's like, well, everyone and it's not really the people that are inside health and wellness. Look at, Lane Norton or Trevor Cashy or Ben or anyone else that's in, right? Even Squat U on some things, like he'll use citations and then other times not. And when he doesn't, people are like, where's the citation? And when he does, people are like, that's stupid. Like,
yeah,
all right, dude. Aaron,
dude, Squat University is a perfect example because I would say like for like 95% of the stuff I agree with him on. We have a small separation with Jefferson curls, but it's very minute because I agree with him on if you have a discrimination, you shouldn't. So on that side, it's really, he just thinks that the loading should be minimal always, and I would disagree. You could adapt to anything. Probably the only thing that I really disagree with him on. But his comment section gets so much hate, and it's like this dude is in my opinion, he is helping so many people. And the argument people make all the time is that like you're fear mongering, like, oh, you're making people be fearful of this stuff. It's like, man, I completely disagree with that analysis of his like post and page.
I think overall, man, Dr. Aaron, I think that someone that's done maybe a little bit more fear mongering is Jeff Cavalier. Athlete X has done more fear mongering than Squat U.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
For sure. But he hit the, see, this is hard too, because social media, you have to have like a clever caption. You have to have something that's going to grab your attention.
Title, a hook.
Yeah. And he's like the don't do dangerous, worst mistake, and it's like, that's grabbing attention. And he, again, same thing. He knows a lot of stuff and he's very knowledgeable. I think there's times when people push that line, and myself included, I try not to, but you push that line of like what you're actually trying to say, and then hopefully in your video or in your caption you clarify your clickbaity title.
Yeah, I mean, I posted a video the other day, and I posted it with two different hooks. One was, this is why you're still fat, and one was, this is why you'll never be shredded. Now they're saying the same things, right? And realistically, I'm also not applying a moral value to being overweight or what have you, but I have to grab someone's attention, because if I say, here's 4 reasons why you're not at the level of body fat percentage you want, first of all, no one's going to ever watch it, and second of all, no one's ever going to hear that before they scroll again. And so it's like, I hear you, because I have to do the same thing, right? You're not going to post something to grab attention.
Did one do better than the other?
Oh, dude, this is why you're fat did way better, way better. There was way more hate, but it did way better. And so it was the same meat.
There's an interesting thing there too, because people respond negatively more. So anytime somebody is going like, you're more likely going to get a negative response. It's like a human thing. It's like you're more likely to respond if it's going to be negative. So that's also challenging with social media, because like, I really try to take into consideration the likes and the shares and stuff, because it does matter. If I have like 2 negative comments and I have, 1,000 shares and likes, it's like, okay, 1,000 people thought that was good. 2 people thought it was bad. Why did those 2 people think it was bad? And then if I can tell by the way that they sentence, their structure of their sentence, is like, okay, they're just hating this. And also too, Ben Patrick actually gave me this piece of advice a while ago, but it's that people will meet you where they are. So when I get a lot of hate on something that I'm doing, typically it's because they believe something different, and they're not where I am. So they believe, like, say somebody hurt their back and I'm doing a Jefferson curl. They're like, you're dumb. This is stupid. Like, don't ever do this. You're going to hurt your back. It's like, I get that. I get where you're coming from. So I try to be a little bit more sympathetic to that and be like, okay, that's where they are now. They just don't know what I know yet.
Yeah. And I think it's also, I don't know about for you, but for dealing with the negativity and the pushback, I try to go with like childlike curiosity instead of judgment, because it's very easy to just be reactive and be like, no, you're stupid. You know?
Dude, it's that, and I, again, like even that recently with the negative comment on my last post, it's like, you can tell a lot by tone. And I'm trying to be better about that. Whereas if the tone's off, to not take it to heart. Because you can, like I said, somebody that's like actually like asking me a question, like, hey, I heard this was dangerous. Like that's like how you should phrase, right? Like if you're like, that's stupid, you're gonna get hurt, you should say, hey, why don't you think you're going to get hurt while doing this, right? Like that now we can actually have a conversation about it. But when it comes out just like, you're stupid and you're gonna hurt people, like it's like, okay, can we, like, let's try to talk about it.
Yeah, it's just a personal attack. It's definitely read differently.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to ride the line, right? Because you're not going to be able to educate enough people to empower themselves to get better if you aren't in the forefront of people saying, like, if stuff flops all the time, if your videos flop, like that's not really having you help other people more. So you got to ride that line for sure.
And that sucks because you do have to play the game. Like I can put out just educational after educational. A lot of times people be like, we want the scale to this and we want to know why. And it's like, that sounds attractive, but you really don't. Because if you did, like, then those videos would do really well, and they don't. So it has to be like patchy at first. And then it's like, and then they're already in it. And then like, oh, I learned something too. That's like the goal, or my goal.
And it's interesting because if it were easy as just giving people what they need, or giving people what they say that they want, then there'd be a lot more people that are a lot bigger, right? Because there's a ton of educational channels that do a great job educating. And I mean,
and that's the hard. That's the challenge too, because you're reinforced to make, like, social media reinforces you to make the short, fast, eye-catching things because they go further. So like, if I spend a lot of time editing and making an educational video and it doesn't go very far, it does feel, and I'm working on it, like being like, okay, you're getting the message out, so it's okay. You don't have to, it doesn't have to go viral, but it does feel like, dang, I spent this amount of time. Whereas if I, for instance, that Jefferson curl video recently on the box, like that video takes me like a minute to edit and make. Whereas like some of my other discriminations videos, those are like a 4 or 5 hour ordeal.
Yeah, where you're speaking and you're going through, like,
right,
you're walking through what's going on in your head when you're programming things, when you're prescribing things, when you're in a position, and how you're writing things, and giving people like a look behind the curtain. But it's almost like sometimes they're like, hey, I just want my back fixed. Like, I don't need to know what you know. Like, just fix my back. Just fix it.
Yeah.
So,
and you can tell too, like, I can, again, same thing. When I get a DM, like the people that are like, hey, I need help, it's like, perfect. Like, I got you. But if it's the people that are like, well, it bugs me sometimes, and it goes away, then it's like, you're probably not going to listen to the level that you need to actually fix it until you're in enough pain where you're like, okay, I have to fix this.
Yeah, I think the same could be said for fat loss, and the same could be said for people that are like, hey, I'm tired of being skinny fat. And I'm not saying there's anything good, bad, or indifferent about any place that anybody's at. I think that we understand that there's better health at certain spots, but it's not my job to tell you that you have to go there. Like, it's your body, do what you want to do. For me, I guess I'm curious, and I'd kind of like to go back to the recovery so we can get to a place where you came up with kind of what you do with your clients. But from injury to first scan with your buddy that's in orthopedics, right? About how long was that?
2 or 3, probably 2 months.
Okay.
2 months where I was like, something's not, like, this isn't getting any better.
Okay. And then from that to then going to see someone else to talk about the surgery options, that was about how long too?
Probably like another month or two, probably like 2 months to get like to the actual, like, I think I got my MRI results like a month later. And then I got my, then I had like the specialist, I was scheduled with the specialist about a month after that.
Okay. So about a third of the year, just even getting to the place where then you could make a decision on like what you wanted to do.
Yeah. And the interesting part about that, and I hear this all the time too, is like, for anything back related, typically, honestly, so far it's been the same recipe to get out of the crap. I mean, I don't care. Like, I've seen a lot of people with different things. Disc degeneration is like my least favorite because everybody has it, and it's like a cop out. Everyone's like, oh, I have that, so I'm never gonna be better. So like, we'll all get it. It's about how you move. But so no matter what really you got going on with your back, it's the same method to get out of that. So that's the thing that's kind of frustrating a little bit is like everybody wants their diagnosis, or everybody wants like I have this individual problem that's specific to me, which I get. It's like we are all individual. It is specific to you. But at the same time, it's like you see enough people move. We all live the same like kind of lifestyle where we're sitting a lot, and then forward flexion with our shoulders because we're on our phone. So it's like a lot of these overarching themes where it's like I could probably get a pretty good idea of how your back is messed up because most of our backs are messed up the same way.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. So from the time that you got the options given to you, you go surgery, right? There's a coin flip chance that you come back for a second one, maybe a third. And then at some point you'd probably have to potentially fuse or do something else that's even more aggressive after that.
Yeah. So typically after if you get a lumpectomy or discectomy, typically any of those things like are basically they just cut out the disc, right? So it's not on the nerve anymore. So potentially the idea is that now that disc isn't putting pressure on the nerve and it's relieving you of symptoms. But that happened for a reason, like, so now you're like, oh, cool. Like, and I would say this is the main problem that I have is that people get out of that and they're like, I'm fixed. Like the pain's gone. And if you're part of the 50% that was successful, the pain's gone. This is great. Like I'm back to normal. But nobody ever said like, hey, that happened for a reason. So now you need to figure out how to move because you were moving in a way that was making that worse. And nobody ever tells them that. So then they go back to doing everything they were doing before. Only now there's no disc there, and they already have a weak back because they haven't done anything with their back for a long time. So now like the probability of having an injury pop up there is pretty, likely.
Yeah. Okay. So when you got the options, what did the next step of your recovery look like? Did you just start using the shirtless guy's advice and started doing that? And then was that like 6 months, 8 months? How'd that look?
Yeah. So with the shirtless dude, he had a program out. It was a full body program, and then I was still a CrossFit coach, so I was trying to coach CrossFit, which was
dude. How
I
the
couldn't
hell were you
demo.
doing
I had
that,
to have
bro?
like people demo.
How are you doing
me.
that with with your back pain?
It was bad. So that was a grind, but so I took again all of his concepts for like the next. So I would say it took me 6 months to figure out all the what's wrong with me, right? And then like, okay, this is what I have now. And then I found him, and then it was like, okay, what is he saying that I should do? And then it took me another 18 months to apply the stuff that I learned from him, and then figure some things out on my own along that way. Like, oh, that to me is a little bit different. I'm going to change that because this feels better. Because so first 6 months, crap. Then I got like maybe a small win, right? Like where I could tie my shoe and I didn't have pain, or I could sit for like a little bit longer during the day without it being on fire. And then you start realizing like, oh, this is what's doing that, or this is why I have that pain, because I've noticed, like, for instance, I remember one time I was brushing my teeth and I was in a garbage position brushing my teeth, which again, if you have built the system, it doesn't really matter what position you're in. But if you're broken at the time and you have, your back's on fire, that matters. So I remember being like, wow, I brush my teeth in a garbage position and I've done this my whole life. So it's like, that's just one instance of like me realizing like, oh, I need to change this position. And when I do that, so I'm not contributing to my pain.
Okay. And in that position that you found yourself on the toothbrush, was that the same exact position that you found yourself in other areas?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. So I would say a posterior pelvic tilt. So when I brush my teeth, I was more in a flexion, lumbar spine flexion. But the interesting thing is for me is that I think I walked around more of an anterior pelvic tilt. So then when I would find my time, when I like in my everyday life, I was in an anterior pelvic tilt, but like certain times when I would like snatch or certain movements, brushing my teeth, or certain things that I would do, I would go hard flexion. Or when I was sitting, I'd be in like hard flexion. So I had like a really extreme, one end to the other end thing. And then eventually, I think typically a herniation happens because of posterior pelvic tilt in some regard, flexion in some aspect, whether that was weight or whatever it was. But so then that was just like the final piece that like, oh, I need to learn where the middle is. And that's something that's like the main thing that I talk about now is like finding a neutral pelvis. So you have a neutral lumbar spine in all of your movements.
Okay. That's a big realization that like you're very
yeah.
aggressively on both sides for everything that you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I
anterior
know.
for
And
this.
and I would say that that's not common. One, it's not common for guys to have, and it's more common for females to have anterior pelvic tilt, especially during pregnancy. And I would say it's primarily with the clients that I've dealt with, it's been one extreme or the other. I don't typically see somebody walking around in an anterior pelvic tilt and then they have like posterior flexion problems within movements. I would say like for myself, that's kind of something like nuance that I discovered like, oh, in these certain things, I'm really bad about that.
Do you know why you were on both extremes? If you don't
I
see
don't
that
know.
normally?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's yeah, I don't know if it's because one of the things that I think is like I love CrossFit. I'm still a CrossFit coach. I have a CrossFit gym. But one of the things I think is that when you try to make shapes, so like CrossFit, when you're first starting CrossFit, you're like, okay, cool. I see all these shapes. I want to make these shapes. That's what I need to do. And then there's intention, or there should be intention behind those shapes. But when there's not, I think weird things can kind of happen. Whereas like if you're talking about like kipping, pull-ups, muscle-ups, you know, just kipping in general, and then you're just like, oh, or butterfly pull-ups, like I'm going to match these positions, like that's all great. But it's like you should be creating tension in a certain way to facilitate the movement. But if you're just like aimlessly getting into those shapes, I think you can make a shape without there being the intention, and that can cause, I don't want to say like, again, that's not the cause, but it's just one of the pieces that I didn't really put all of it together.
I mean, I'll give you that all day. I don't think you could say, hey, causally, this is the one thing that did it. But I do think that when someone doesn't have the ability to create tension across strict pull-ups, pronated, there's little to no business doing kipping because you don't know where your knees and your hips are supposed to be. You don't know arch or hollow. You don't have any tension across your midline at all.
Yeah.
You're just like, hey, I see Coach Daniel doing this, or I see Coach Mitchell, or I see Coach James. Like, oh, they're popping up there. It looks like I can get in that position, that same position.
Yeah.
But the difference is the tension may be a 10 with us, right? Popping back and forth.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And for them, it's a 2, and they're breaking at the knees. And then there's like a shearing force in the low back. And then
that's 100% it.
You're like
you articulated it better than I did. That's 100% it. And I would say the same thing for squatting. So like, and this would be more my example too, is that I think I would start out anterior and below parallel. I had no idea what was going on with my pelvis or low back. And to get depth, especially when people are like, hey, you got to get down below parallel. A lot of people, when they get that cue, they round their spine under to get lower. And it's like, they're actually really not getting lower. They're just, it feels like they are, but they're just rounding their low back. So I think for me, when I would get buried in the bottom of a snatch or buried in a heavy squat, like I was in that anterior and then that extreme to a posterior because I just didn't know what was going on below parallel.
So it's almost like a polarization, like the aggressive shift is probably what puts you in a position where you injured it faster.
I would say that's what I believe. And again, people would make the argument that like no study shows that a butt wink or posterior pelvic tilt is harmful in squats. I think that's a fine. Again, if you build the system to be robust, yeah, it's probably fine. Like you could build it to be strong enough to withstand more pressure in the bottom of a position like that. But I don't think it's the safest way to squat.
Yeah, but I mean, someone could say like there's no empirical evidence to say yada yada. But if you let a 300-pound squat clean crash a foot onto you, what's going to happen with your low back?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I know, and it is kind of frustrating because I try to be nuanced enough about that because I agree with you. That is frustrating because it's like, it goes back to the posture thing. It's like, yeah, your posture sucks. Like that matters. If you don't think that the way you stand matters because there's no studies that say it, like it matters. Like you need to, the system works a certain way.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something interesting. And I think that kind of goes back to, what we were talking about previously about you don't need empirical evidence to know that maybe you need to hit ample protein for muscle building, right? We don't have to get caught up on, is it 0.8, 1.2, 1.62, like chill out, eat more, right? And get yourself to a place where you need to be. How long doing shirtless guys stuff and then kind of realizing that you need to be neutral pelvis, right? Yourself. How long was it until you got connected with Ben?
So I would say that 18 months, I was kind of figuring stuff out and exploring movement. And then the 2-year mark, I was seeing knees over toes guy stuff. And I was like, this guy's crazy. I mean, I remember thinking like, who? Like, because again, it was so like, against, I mean, I coached vertical shin with squatting early days CrossFit because that's what I thought, like stack the chain. So he was so anti that. But he was able to do extremely heavy lifts at an extreme range of motion, or a really big range of motion. And then eventually those videos were just like boom, boom, boom. So it was like 6 months really, really hurt, 18 months figuring that out. At the 2-year mark, I felt back to normal, where I was like, okay, I'm able to do what I want. And then I got onto ATG, and then I started doing, I did zero, dense, standards, and then he had 2 other ones after that. I don't think he has them anymore. There was like athletic ability, and then I don't know, there's 2 other ones. But so I went through that whole process, and I had no the cool thing was, at the time, I had no ego in the game. I was just like, I just want to, like, I was broken, now I'm not. I'll just take my time. And I think what's happening with ATG specifically is people are trying to go to the end thing, the thing that looks cool right away. And it's like, hey, this is I've been doing like ATG movements for like 2.5 years now. And it's a slow process. So like really trying to like take the ego out of it early on and just explore, the positions, your bodies, where's your limitations, that sort of thing.
Okay. So you did it like how it was written, right? Similar to probably how you're writing programs for people. Hey, this is 0. This is day 0, right? Here's 1 month. Here's 2 months. We're not jumping to year 2 because you think that you can do it. And maybe you can for 1 or 2 reps, but you can't for 16 under control.
Yep. Exactly. And I also think, and this is the main, if there's one piece of this, if you are here and I have a disc herniation and there's one piece of advice, my piece of advice is that before you go down exploring big ranges of motion, you need to build a strong foundation in neutral ranges of motion and be symptom free, and then go build into ranges of motion. So I'm a huge advocate of finding the middle before you're trying to build a extension and flexion.
Okay. And those foundational building blocks. So finding neutral, what else is on that list?
So I would like figuring out what your ribs are doing. Are your ribs stacked over your pelvis, right? Is your pelvis, and the main thing is like really like your pelvis is such a pivotal, part of your body, because everybody, or not everybody, but a lot of people move in a way where they don't realize that, like whatever their pelvis does, they're like, oh, my spine does that too. And it's like, no, like it doesn't have to. Like you can control your pelvis so you can keep your spine in the positions that you need to for certain movements. So like when I do a conventional deadlift, you obviously if you're really good at deadlifting, you can have flexion and stand from that. I'm not really good at deadlifting compared to like the pros, but I like to keep a neutral spine. So understanding what that means and being able to maintain that. So that's just one example, deadlifting. You could say squatting. You could say when you do push-ups, when you do sit-ups, like all of these things, like understanding what is actually happening. I think that is the biggest piece. And then being able to control like the middle, especially if you are in pain. So you're not contributing to it. And then once you're like, wow, like all these movements feel great. I'm strong in these middle ranges. And now I want to start exploring out. But I think, again, people start to say, Jefferson curls are going to take away my back pain. I have a disc herniation. I need to do Jefferson curls. It's like, no, you don't. I actually am adamantly against that. I think that's the last thing you need to do.
Yeah, and I think you said earlier, is that something that goes against the grain with a lot of people that implement Jefferson curls? Like, do you and them not agree?
Yeah. I would say people just don't have the understanding of disc herniations yet. Some people do, and it's come a long way. Now I can find information on disc herniations, where when I was 2019 it was really hard to find anybody talking about it. Now you see more about that. But most people kind of lump that disc herniation into like the chronic back pain, like this is just all back pain. And it's like, there's degrees, right? So like, say you had back pain and it's because you live in overextension. A Jefferson curl in theory could help you because you need to explore the other side, flexion. But going from living into an extension, kind of like we talked about with my issue, and then going extreme flexion is probably going to cause an acute injury. Because your body's like, oh, I didn't even know this existed. So before that happens, it's like, no, make your way to the middle, find out where the middle is, and be like, okay, cool. This is the middle. This is extension. This is flexion, middle, extension, flexion, right? And then knowing that in all your movements, then you can start to cheat that out okay, I'm going to go extension right now. I'm going to go flexion right now, and then build, 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 build. But if you just try to go like, I need Jefferson curls. I live here. I'm in extension. I'm going to do a Jefferson curls. Like, nah, I don't think that's the right. I don't think that's the right like process.
Got it. So if you take a ruler, you want to be able to control being at 6 inches on a ruler that's a foot long, and then start to cheat a quarter of an inch this way, a quarter of an inch this way, a quarter of an, and just keep going out until you get to a place where it seems almost progressional, or how we would say we would regress in CrossFit down to a scaling movement that you can do with pristine accuracy and then moving, instead of just like,
100%.
yo, I'm going to try to do bar muscle ups.
Yeah. And I've never done any of that. Yeah. It's 100% that. And the other interesting thing with this, and this is like the argument would be made on what I'm saying, is that say you live in a posterior pelvic tilt, so you're living in flexion, you aren't going to actually find the middle, right? Like, because your middle isn't a real middle anymore. You're still like, say you're like, oh, I'm going to go to the other way, but the other way is still probably posterior pelvic tilt because you live there. But it's slowly building out into that direction. And so like, say you're in posterior, this is end range posterior for you, but they're both still posterior. I still want you in the middle of those because you're inching your way out of it. You're not going extreme to the other side.
Got it. So it's even more marginal then. We're talking about just, hey, from here to where you might still be same tilt side, split the difference, and then start to work out of that.
Exactly. One of my favorite movements is again, this is like, if we're just talking low back discrimination, one of my favorite movements is pelvic tilts or pelvic circles, because you can explore that whole position. You can be like, holy crap, like I am tight here. I can't go any more this direction. Like, you can really figure out where your movement lies within that. And that's what, and even just for getting like blood flow and movement to the area, that can be super, super helpful.
Yeah. My first interaction with pelvic tilts was in a PT's office when I got sciatica when I was in high school playing football. And I'd never in my life ever thought about doing a pelvic tilt on the ground. I was like, that looks like something a woman does in dance class. Like, what am I doing? But the relief that you can get, from the control of just doing a body weight movement, laying on a bench or laying on the ground.
100%. 100%. And again, the same thing, like, this is something else that I would say, especially with back pain, is people overlook like the basics. So they're like, there's no way that's going to help me. That's like, I'm above that. And it's like, no, like, if you just, it's such low hanging fruit. And it's so not, even like my program for disc herniations, it is not sexy. It's like boring and it's hard to stick with. You have to be super disciplined. And you have to really want it, because, if you're in a lot of pain, it's like, oh, then you're good. You have like a roadmap. I'm fine. I have a roadmap. But it's like, that's not fun stuff, but it's what you need. So it's really hard to put, and even Ben did a really good job with this on ATG stuff, is like, he made it sexy. That stuff actually isn't sexy either. What's sexy about it is what he does after he has that ability. Like, the cool things, you're like, I want to do that. So you'll stick with like the boring stuff because your goal is to get to the cool stuff. It's the same thing with like back pain and stuff. It's like, you got to reset, build up, back to the basics, be humble, and be like, I'm just going to try, I'm going to just learn for a month and see what happens. And those are the people that I'm like, are hitting like huge progress right away. The people that are like, well, I'm still trying to go to the gym and lift 3 times a week, but my pain isn't better. And it's like, well, yeah, like you're doing the same thing that you were doing to get you here,
Yeah. I think it's interesting. And I think maybe I'd love your thoughts on this, because I think that Ben, where most people see is his test of mobility, not him working on his mobility. Like, the sexy things is him testing or showing you
100%.
what it looks like to put it in motion for something functional, right? Not the work that he's doing every day, all day.
100%. If you've ever done any like ATG stuff, like tib raises, calf raises, ATG split squats are kind of sexy, but like, Patrick step up, Peterson step up, like it's not sexy stuff. I think, and this is a good point to say too with social media, is that even my page, it's like, it's the expression of movement. That's what it is. That's all it is. It's just the expression of movement that I have. It's the expression of movement that Ben has. That is not the training that he's doing. He's doing a completely different thing to build up joints individually so he can express a movement like that, and be fine. But it's like, people think, oh, that's it. Like, I need to do that. And it's like, no, that's like the outcome of what he's been doing. That's like his work. You can see it through that movement, but that is not the work.
Yeah. Like, you're, I don't know what this is called. You have like 2 yoga blocks. You're essentially sitting in, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking
So
about. I've only
like,
done one video with yoga blocks in my whole life.
yeah,
So I know
yeah.
exactly
So
what you're talking about.
that's another one. You're like, hold on, there's a way to train the mobility and a way to train opening of the things that
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
utilizing here. But someone might look at that and say, well, that's how I get better. Like,
Exactly.
it's
Exactly.
not
And
though.
it's like, exactly. Not at all. Not at all. And, but the interesting piece is that you can, once you have the ability,
Mhm,
that the expression of movement can be your way of maintaining that ability.
mhm,
So once you have a certain thing, you don't have to, like, say, once you know muscle ups, right? You don't have to go back and relearn each individual piece of the muscle ups. Like you could maintain that,
mhm,
the movement by doing the movement. But it's just not the way you got it.
mhm. Yeah. And so the way that you got there is not the way that you'll progress either. Have to
Exactly.
break stuff down and reload. And I
Exactly.
promise you that we'd be on here an hour. We might go a few minutes over, but I do want to give you
You're
some space for you to kind of bust down and open up a little bit about what your athletic longevity and your body alignment programs look like, what someone could expect, and who they're a good candidate for.
for sure. So my body alignment program, Becoming More Human. If you have a back injury, I typically say do a month of that no matter what, because it's going to teach. So one of the things that I do is there's 24 different movements in the program,
Mm-hmm.
and I run everything through TruCoach, so you can send videos back to me that I get feedback on within 24 hours. And those movements are as much of a test to let me know where your imbalances are, or as they are the ways to strengthen and fix imbalances. So it's really a perfect system where I can be like, cool, I see all of these faults, and then here's all the corrections, and then you can be correcting, fixing your alignment and imbalances. So that's like the number one thing I say. Like a lot of people want to jump over that, and it's like I think that's like where you need to start.
Mm-hmm.
And then athletic longevity, actually I just switched to that. I need to change it, but it's strength through length now. And it's that program is just about, so once you have a strong foundation, you can do everything middle range, everything's good, you have control, then you can go into like strength through length, where you start exploring every joint through a full range of motion, full flexion, full extension. And I think the goal with the human body in general is to explore every joint through a bigger range of motion as you can. And it's not even really, I mean, yes, it's the range of motion, but it's also the tension within the range of motion. If you're in like a reverse Nordic curl,
Mm-hmm.
like creating tension when your quads are engaged with that, and then you put tension on them. I mean, that's creating like a really robust system. It's a long road, right? Like, again, I've been doing this stuff for like 2.5 years. And I'm not anywhere near, like, I could be a lot better. But it's a way to build the system up to kind of mitigate injuries. Like and it's funny because everyone says like, oh, you're going to hurt yourself. It's like, these are the things that I'm doing to prevent me from getting hurt, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why I can show the things that I can show and I don't get hurt. But nobody is immune to injury. I could get hurt tomorrow. It's just a way of kind of, I hate the term, but bulletproofing the system, or
Mm-hmm.
making the system as robust as possible, so it limits the amount of injury that you could incur.
Okay. Heck yeah. So the overall, you're saying anyone with injury, it's a body alignment program. And then after that, we're talking about athletic longevity for the bulletproofing. I kind of like that word, but I think sometimes it gets taken out of context, like biohacking does, right? You're
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
we take this too far, right? You don't need a
yeah.
CGM if you don't have diabetes. You need to chill out.
Right.
But
It's a sexy word, but it's not, like, nobody's bulletproof. That's why it's
yeah,
hard. It's like I've used it, and every time I use it, I'm like, God dang it, I need to come up with a better
yeah,
word than that, because everybody can get hurt.
for sure. Absolutely. Well, I love to hear that there's two places that people can jump in with you. And both of them, are those both one-on-one coaching with feedback from you?
Yep, 100%. Yep.
Okay. Okay. So both programs are like that. And if people are looking out for you, obviously we can find you on Instagram, Human Movement Guy. Where else can the
Yep.
people find you, or is that kind
Yeah,
of
I have a website too, HumanMovementGuy.com.
okay?
And then I have, like, in my link tree, I have like my email, my phone number, my like I've literally, like, I've put like 6 different
Mm-hmm.
ways to get a hold of me. So there's, like, yeah, through my Instagram, you should be able to find a way that you have.
Heck yeah. And one last question before we stop the recording and hop off here. When can we expect to find Mitchell on YouTube?
I did do a couple things on YouTube. It's so hard. I want to build that platform because it's an
Mm-hmm.
educational platform, and I love that. And people are there. Like, when you have even when I have a question, like, oh, I'll YouTube this. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
do. Like, it's a great platform. For me right now, it's just about timing. I have a lot of things going on. I'd love to do long format videos. I'd have to
Mm-hmm.
figure out a better way to you know, like for instance, Knees Over Toes Guy does a phenomenal long format video. He's very, very good at it. And I think people don't realize how good he is at that. It's
Yeah.
unreal because he can just talk and it's one take and it's beautiful. And he gets all his points across really, really nicely. And I think that that's a testament to a decade of doing the work that he's been doing. But yes, I am on YouTube now. There's like maybe 10 videos, I think. And they're whatever, but that it's a goal of mine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if nothing else, taking your posts that you spend time on and put on Instagram and just taking them without Instagram watermark and just throwing them on YouTube, because
I do that with TikTok and I
Yeah.
tried that with YouTube and I just don't know the platform well enough yet because there's shorts and then there's the long form and I just got to figure it out.
For sure. Well, maybe we'll get into it at some point. I'll be happy to throw some pointers. I'm no master, but we do have
you're further along than I am. It sounds like
so 1,200 videos. Yeah, we have like 1,200 videos on YouTube. So
nice.
Yeah, across 2 or 3 accounts. But yeah,
that's awesome.
It's definitely it takes some getting used to for sure. It's a different format than Instagram and where everything's just swipe.
I kind of like that about it though too, because you can talk long and you don't have to be boom, 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 boom.
You have more space to say things that take more context, and take more explaining, more nuance. So I really appreciate you being here, man. I will link your Instagram and the links to your programs below in description, both on all streaming and on YouTube. And we really appreciate you being here. And dude, we'll see you later. Hold on one second. I'm gonna stop the recording.
All right, absolutely.